Hello boys and girls, and welcome back to the channel. I'm your host Spoons, and these are my sprues. Now for this video, this is the group build that I mentioned previously for the Mediocre Modelers group on Facebook, the 148 scale P-40 group build. I love the P-40. I think it's a really iconic aircraft and it captures that time period perfectly. It was an aircraft that served in every theater of the war for every allied country possible. It was even captured by some Axis countries. So it was everywhere and anywhere that you could possibly think of during World War II. I personally like it because I think it's one of the unsung heroes, especially at the beginning of the war, with holding the line and then turning the tide of battle. As you can see here, I love it so much, it's the background on my computer. That's the iconic Flying Tigers. So I have several P-40, 148 scale P-40 kits in my stash. I have both of the new tooling Airfix kits, the P-40 Tomahawk Mark II, that would be the British variant, and then the P-40B Warhawk, which is the American variant. Between these two kits alone, there's 4 different schemes in 4 different theaters that you could build these aircraft up in. But I figured a lot of people in the group build would probably be doing these, so I held off on those, and I wanted to do something a little different. I figured you'd see a lot of Flying Tigers, you'd see a lot of US AAF or RAF aircraft. So I had this one sitting in my stash. This is Academy's P-40 Mark II. This is an older kit. It says it was released in 1999. I got it because of this sexy box art, okay? Look at that box art. Tell me that's not sweet, all right? This is Aces of the African Front. Basically, it's an older kit, way older kit, we'll get into that, with new decals. And what they give you is these really sweet cartograph decals with the iconic shark mouth. Little tidbit for you, Flying Tigers didn't come up with it. They stole it from the Aussies in North Africa, so give credit where credit's due. We're not gonna do desert, we're gonna do direct opposite, okay? We're going to the winter wastelands of Russia, yeah. So I know, probably not a great time to be going to Russia, really, in the world, but you know, different time period, different events. We won't get hung up on it. But what I decided to do was, instead of making this desert bird, I decided to do a Soviet Lend-Lease P-40 in a completely whitewashed winter camo scheme. So without further ado, this is my Soviet Lend-Lease P-40. So our first look at the sprues. The exterior detail on this kit looks pretty nice. Panel lines, rivets, even the fabric on the control surfaces is molded in there. So that gives it a nice texture, but when you get inside, it is sparse. So there's no connector points on, the directions weren't very good. So you just kind of figure it out as you go. Again, don't get this kit. There's better P-40s. And then you just get, you know, a control stick, and I guess that's maybe a throttle stick, or maybe that controls flaps or something, but that's all you get on the inside. And then the interior, I just sprayed with AK's black acrylic primer. Everything got a coat of that. Once everything got primed, it got sprayed with Vallejo's Model Air interior green, zinc chromate green, and then I went around and picked out the detail in the cockpit to give it a little more variety. I'm not going to show this cockpit. We're going to close the canopy, so I'm not too concerned with it. But when you do look inside, you'll see a little more depth than just like a green cockpit. And then we gave it a dry brush with Tamiya's metallic gray, so gives everything a little more of a metal look, a bit of a worn look, and a bit of a pop at the same time. Now the plus side for this kit being a turd means I can do a little bit of scratch building. So what I did here was I used 0.3 millimeter galvanized steel wire to make buckles for seat belts, and I wrapped them around a matchstick because the matchstick had more of a square shape, and it's what I had at my disposal at the time. I'm probably going to make a jig for this if I try to do it in the future. So all I did was wrap the metal around and then cut down the center of the coils. And then when I take this coil off, I'll have these square type buckles. They almost look like chainmail when you look at them. And then super glued the wire across the middle of the buckle and then trimmed it down. So that's where you thread the strap through. And then for the harnesses, I use Tamiya's masking tape for curves, the 2mm one. This is really cool masking tape. It's not like most, it's more vinyl almost, and it can go like around irregular surfaces or make irregular patterns. So it's really good for masking off really wonky things, especially on aircraft. I thought it worked really well for the seat belts. For the lap belts, I made like this hook and loop system. Don't know how accurate it is. I'm kind of going off of what I've seen on Photo Etch, and this is kind of what I came up with. First time, you got to figure it out. I was happy with how this appeared. When I got these done, I just went ahead and threaded some more of the Tamiya masking tape through to finish up the lap belts. And then to paint the belts, I used a mixture of Tamiya's XF60 dark yellow and Tamiya's XF62 olive drab, and then some water to thin it out. It's made like a khaki type color, and probably should have gone a little lighter on this, but I'm happy with how it turned out. So I primed the seat belts, and then I laid down my custom khaki color on my seat belts here. And then for the buckles, I used Vallejo's aluminum. Those really made them pop. I was really happy with how that looked when I was finished with it. And then just using some super glue, I glued them to the back of the seat and then trimmed whatever excess was left. And then we added the lap belts. This looks a little big. It's probably 1mm away from being the right scale. I probably should have gone 1mm on these, but again, this kit wasn't insanely accurate or very well detailed, so it works for this canvas, let's say. I'm happy with how they look. And with a closed canopy, I think it'll do the job. For the control panel, I decided to use AK's white weathering pencil to kind of pick out the detail within the dials. It didn't turn out as great as I thought it would, but I cleaned it up with a toothpick in a wet cotton bud and then put some Tamiya's clear gloss over the dials to give it a glass look. It did what I needed it to do. So again, it'll just add some more variety when you look into the cockpit. And then I picked out some of the buttons with red. And then everything went inside the fuselage. It's pretty simple to figure out, but again, not a lot of connector points, not a lot of detail in the instructions. So I did have to take my time dry fitting and figuring out what I was going to do before I glued it in, which you should do anyway, just to make sure you're not rushing headlong into anything. That should be a good rule. Dry fit everything, even if you know it's going to be a really good kit. And then I decided to drill out the holes in the 30 caliber gun barrels on the nose. I did this on all the gun barrels. I did it on the 50 calibers in the wings, the 30 calibers on the nose, and then I drilled out the exhausts. And then once we got them on, they actually fit real nice and real clean for what it is. And there you go. There's some drilled out gun barrels. So a little more realism to the model, give it a little more depth. And then just in the cockpit, finish up some detail painting. Just use Tamiya's flat brown for the headrests here. So talking about being an old model, if you get on ScaleMates, if you get on ScaleMates, Academy says that this is a new tool from 1999. One of my friends on the Mediocre Model group said it's probably the retool of the old Frog kit. So things look a little out of scale, and being that old, it's lacks a lot. So the fit wasn't terrible, but there was still a lot of seams and gaps to be filled. Even on the surface, when you look at some of the newer kits, there's quite a bit of surface detail missing. For what it was, though, the surface detail was pretty decent on this. So then I moved to the landing gear and I decided to make some brake lines. Again, a little more detail on this kit, gives it a little more character, a little more authenticity. And I just used the same metal wire, and I found a reference photo online. I shaped it into the form the brake lines would have taken on the actual aircraft. Just super glued them on. And then around the middle of the strut there's metal brackets, it looks like, or braces. that wrap around the brake line and the strut to hold it nice and firm. So I just made that out of Tamiya masking tape. This is just 1 millimeter wide, cut it real thin, and then wrapped it around. And then that's your brace for your brake lines. And there's the initial landing gear. So definitely adds a lot of detail and it looks very cool. So I'm pretty pumped with this little bit of scratch building I pulled off on this. Kind of proud of myself. So for the landing gear, I just went and painted it the RAF sky color that the belly of the aircraft's going to be. The instructions called for it to be silver. I decided that I would paint it the sky color and then contrast that with the metal parts that will be on the landing gear. Like the hydraulic will be like a silver color, and then the brackets around the brake line will be a silver color. So in P-40s, the landing gear a lot of times would be painted the same color as the belly because they were partially exposed when they went up. They didn't have gear doors for all of it. So they would have been painted that color or they would have been silver. So it's kind of up in the air. So I took some creative license here and it just adds some more variety to the color instead of it all just being one metal color. And then, like I said, the hydraulic there will be painted silver. Is that a piston? I don't know what you'd call that. I guess a hydraulic. And then the brackets around the brake lines will be metal. And then the brake lines themselves, I'm going to paint with Tamiya's rubber black. And that is just Vallejo's aluminum. And that's what the finished landing gear will look like. So it looks pretty cool. Looks a lot better than just that basic out of the box piece that would have gone in without the detail. So pretty happy with how this turned out. And that's what the whole landing gear will look like right there, baby. Pretty sick. So I know this isn't scratch building, but I was pretty happy with how that came out. So once I got the canopy masked and detached, I went ahead and primed it. And then I laid down the camouflage pattern. For these, I used AK's Air Series RAF camouflage. This is another one of those paint sets that has all the specific colors in it from the entire war. These are really cool, but the problem with these paint sets is you're like, oh, I have all the paints for all the things. But then you'll end up using one or two more than the rest. So then you'll run out of the whole series and you'll just have to go buy those paints again. But they're really cool and really convenient. When you do get them, when you start to run out of them, you realize I'm just going to start spending money on paint. Now, these say you can spray them straight out of the airbrush. I found I had to turn my air pressure up. So I usually shoot between 17 to 15 PSI. I actually had to turn this up to about 23 PSI for it to come out right. I did have some tip dry issues, which wasn't bad. I kept the air cap off my airbrush so I could clean it when it did tip dry. And then it did go down pretty smooth. For the most part, I liked them. I did struggle brush pretty hard with the brown color. I don't know why. It didn't want to come out. I added a touch of thinner to it, but for some reason, I just could not get that color to come out of my airbrush. Everything else came out fine, but that one, the RAF Dark Earth, just gave me a hell of a time. I'm going with the RAF Dayfighter scheme because since this is a Tomahawk Mark II, this is a British variant that would have been sent to the Russians. So it was built to British specifications and then it was lended to the Russians. So it would have come over in a RAF camouflage pattern. So the pattern is going to be RAF Dark Green, RAF Dark Earth, and then the belly is going to be RAF Sky. Now, moving on to the insignias on the wings and the airframe. I made up a lighter olive drab with the dark yellow and the olive drab from Tamiya. And I'm using the American and Stalin Skies AML mask set. This is a pretty good mask set. It comes with everything you need. It is intended for the trumpeter kit. So if you try to use masks for the canopy, they are undersized. They're for the trumpeter canopy. So I don't know if they'll work on the Airfix kit or not. But I basically laid these down. I painted the olive drab over where the British roundels would have been because the Soviets would have covered them up. Then I laid the star mask over the circle and I used Mission Models red and it went down really well. And so you get this really clean red star. Now, this is the cool part. I put a clear coat of Tamiya's clear all over the plane. And then I used this Tresemme hairspray. You can use any kind of hairspray. I use this one. I decanted it, which means I sprayed it out of the can into a little cup and sprayed it through my airbrush. You can just spray it right from the can. I just wanted a little more control over the surfaces of the plane. So I ran it through my airbrush. It worked great. All over the model, on top of the model where the white paint's gonna go, I laid down 2 light coats of hairspray. And then once that dried, you don't wait very long because you want to reactivate the hairspray later. So about 15 minutes or so, I put down a pretty liberal coat of Tamiya's white. Well, don't say liberal, but it wasn't just like a very clean coat. It was just a very general coat of Tamiya's white all over the model. That is going to cover all of our beautiful camouflage and markings we did. Now with the red stars, so I basically used the negative mask, and then I guess I would say use the positive mask to remask the red star when I put the white paint back over it. So you want to keep the red kind of clean, or you can go back and paint the red over the white if you want. It depends on how they do it. I don't know historically how accurate that is. So that's what I ended up doing. And you see there the overspray, I actually went to overspray from the white to go over onto the underside. So that's why I wasn't too worried about the belly color coming over onto the camouflage. And then just when I got down to that line, I didn't want to cover it too much. So I was real careful there. But yeah, just a real general coverage. You don't want to put down coats and coats because it's not supposed to be white. It's supposed to be washed in white. So that's what we're achieving here. And then, like I said, you don't want stuff to dry. You don't want the hairspray to dry or the white to dry. So now using an old brush, I cut it down so it's more stiff at the end. I used an old brush and just kind of dipped it in water, and that's going to activate the hairspray under the acrylic paint. Now remember, you use acrylic paint because it's water-based. And I'm going to go along all the leading edges and like the main walkways and the places that are going to be heavily weathered. And I'm also going to pull it in the direction of the airflow because that's kind of how the paint's going to get worn off. Now you see that green tint. The brush was kind of dirty because I used this before. I didn't really clean it. And it kind of made this green filter, which I didn't hate because it kind of dirtied the white a little more. It wouldn't be so clean anyway. But as you can see here, you just go over it with the brush, add a little pressure. Depending on how weathered you want it to be, it's up to you. So if you want more, go more. If you want light, work lightly. If you want a subtle look. So I'm going to wear this down a little bit because this is something that's serving on the front lines. I believe in the stencil set I got, this aircraft flew out of the defense of Moscow. So, 41, 42. So things are looking pretty rough for the Soviets at this point in the war. So you see around the engine cowlings, around the gun fairings, all this stuff this is where it's going to be worked on. There's going to be a lot of hands on it, a lot of wear and tear. So you're going to kind of peel back the white in these places. Now, for this aircraft, the only real decal was this serial number. And the decals I got in the AML set were really thin and either it was my fault or their, I don't know, but they disintegrated basically. So I put this through my Cricut cutter, and I cut out this mask. I don't think it's the right stencil. Now when I realize I should have just like found RAF stencil, but I found my own stencil. It kind of looked, it had the blockish look of the letters. So I got the right size and everything. And then I just used NATO black and I sprayed over it real lightly. And I got the serial number of the aircraft, and I thought it looked real cool when I was done with it. Not the exact stencil, like I said before. It's a little more blockish, maybe a little more cartoonish than it should be. But once I peeled it off here, it looks pretty solid. So I'm happy with that. You know, maybe they applied it back over the whitewash. I don't know. Maybe they masked it off when they whitewashed it. Who knows? It's not perfect, you know, but that's sort of the thing about doing, especially World War II aircraft, is they get worn so much. So if you stress over like what colors are supposed to be right or how things are supposed to be, I mean, they got patched and repainted and repaired, and, you know, they would use parts of other aircraft to fix aircraft. So they get cannibalized here and there. So World War II aircraft, I think, is a really open palette to what you can do, you know, weathering and paint wise, which makes it a really cool subject. And then I just mixed up my own oil wash here. This is like some maybe sienna and maybe a little bit of black or Payne's gray. And then in the direction of airflow, I'm using a makeup sponge and I'm just pulling it all back in the direction of airflow. There you go. Gets a real cool dirty look. Onto the weathering pencils. These are really cool. I don't know how to use them just yet, but this was a great template for this experiment. And I definitely think these are worth having in your arsenal. I picked up the whole batch, the whole 37 batch, when I was at Andy's Hobby headquarters. And then I went along the leading edges here with one of the darker browns. I think that's sienna or umber. I'm pretty sure it's sienna. And then, you know, just in the airflow, pull them back. They're pretty subtle, so you got to build it up. But you get these cool weathering streaks, you know, in the panel lines and the exhausts and the guns. And I thought they were really cool. So I put them on. I did several different versions with this. So this I put them on dry and used a damp brush to pull them back. And then you'll see in a minute, I made them wet and used them that way. But I got this real cool streaking effect with the panels. I really like this. And it added some more depth. And these are cool weathering brushes I picked up as well from AK. So this is where I wet the tip of the pencil. And I wanted this muddy, dirty look. You know, dirt in the wheel wells and stuff where it's landing, it's kicking up dirt and mud onto the underside of the aircraft. So then I use just a series of brushes, pulling them back, you know, flatter brush for a broader look, and then kind of a stippling motion to make it look a little more splattery. So that's what I did there. This is the earth brown that is in the pencil set. So I used it for here. And you can kind of stack the pencils and get different colors out of them. Did the same things with the wheels. It's winter time. You know, they're probably landed on makeshift airfields. They've been pushed back. This is, like I said, 41, 42. So you got to think they're probably using some really dirty, you know, really lean facilities. They probably don't have all the luxuries that you think they would have. So, you know, they're in desperate times. So here I was dirtying up the wheels and the landing gear. I thought this had a pretty cool look to it. And I just used a cotton bud with the wet pencil tip and put it on there. And then I did the same thing for the exhaust. There's actually an exhaust color. And there's a black, and then I used a little bit of the sienna color. I think I used too wet of a brush here. It was a little too streaky for my liking and not enough, like not puffy enough. I guess if that's the term to put it, where, you know, it looked more like exhaust. But anyway, I went along the edges of the exhaust here and then pulled it back in the way the airflow. That's something else to pay attention to, because not all exhaust flows the same way down aircraft. So when you're trying to do exhaust down the fuselage of an aircraft, that's something you kind of want to pay attention to, because they all have different staining directions on them, I would say. So just with another cotton bud, I kind of blended it in and got the effect I was trying to go for here. These are really cool pencils. I'm excited to use them. This is the first time using them, so this was a real FAFO situation, but I'm happy I did it because I learned a lot. This was a great kit to try them out on. You know, it was already a turd to begin with, so everything I did on it, I was pretty happy. It made for a good palette for all of these techniques. And then I did the same thing around the gun housing where you got the soot building up on the guns. I liked it there. Here's another part where I probably used it too wet. I probably should have gone dry with the pencil and tried to blend it more. So I went wet with the pencil, a little too streaky for my liking. This took a couple of times before I got it where I wanted it, but it wasn't as dusty as I would have liked it. So definitely too wet with the pencil there. But hey, you live and you learn, and that's what this is all about right now. So regardless, I think I got some cool burn marks and soot staining on the exhaust ports and just dirtied up the flaps a little bit with it too. And then I went over and put some white to kind of wash it out again, so it's not as dark. Give it a little more faded look. I just went along the panel lines, and then I pulled it back in the way the airflow. The pencil tip was wet here as well. And this was Dirty Snow, I believe is the color. There's tons in this set. I know you can buy them in the set at like 4 or 5, but there's tons of pencils in this set. So that's what I did here is I just kind of faded everything out with the white, give it a little more of a washed look, a little more of a winterized look. Maybe it snowed on it. I don't know. There's a lot of options with this aircraft in this time period. So that's what makes it really, really fun. So I just blended it in there, and it made a cool effect. And then using earth brown and then sienna again, I made up some real dirty marks along the wing roots where the pilot and the crew chief and whatnot would have been walking. So you got to think they're tracking dirt and mud up there. So, and then I'll do lightly on the other side because, you know, somebody would have been walking over there too. So another little light stippling of the earth brown. Get a little dirty birdie. And that's pretty much it with weathering. I'm pretty happy with everything I achieved with it. And then the best part, removing the masks. I just used a scalpel, number 10 scalpel, brand new. Just go around and you just kind of break where the paint and the hairspray and all that built up with the mask, so you're not peeling paint off the frame. So you just kind of break that seal between the paint and the tape, and then, you know, get a fine set of tweezers and you pull it right off, and boy, oh boy, is this the best part.